Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. Link right here in the description. If you click on that link, you go all the way through. You pay the $2.99. You get access to 10 different channels and our stage shows, content you can't get anywhere else. The most heat anywhere for information and conversation. It's Off the Floor. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network, includes Prize Picks. Use the code 5FIVE. NBA games coming back every night. You want to be on Prize Picks. It is legal in the state of Florida. That's our official fantasy partner. Use the code 5FIVE. Put down $5. You get $50 to play right away. That's prizepicks.com. Again, use the code FIVE. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne.
Yikes. Five on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars. Wearing rubber frauds.
Down the Biscayne.
Kept the floor playing. Got it all band. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. Inspire have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at Five Reasons Sports. We got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. Hope you enjoyed the break from basketball for one day. We're getting back into it now. We know most of you did not enjoy All-Star Weekend, although we did enjoy watching Tyler Hero out there. So make sure that you check out that episode that Greg and I did after his All-Star appearance. Didn't last very long. They need to change the format again. Total disaster, in my opinion. But anyway, it is what it is. He was there. He'll always be an All-Star now. They can't take that away from him. That's a pretty cool designation. Again, one of only 3 Heat draft picks in history to make the All-Star team for the Heat. So that's pretty cool. Him, Bam, and Wade. He also had some comments over the past couple of days. One of which was related to Jimmy Butler and the number 22, where he said that the way things went at the end didn't seem to have any problem with Wiggins wearing 22. This feels like, again, Tyler stepping more into his leadership, into some things that we heard about behind the scenes. And I think he's free to speak his mind in that case. And he also said, though, this was on Sirius XM, he said that they're not really contenders right now. He acknowledged that. And for a player who is usually speaking up, about what is going to be accomplished. And also it's in contrast to the way Jimmy used to portray things, which was, yeah, just get us to the postseason. Nobody's going to beat us. Boston didn't want to play us if I was healthy, all that kind of stuff. Tyler's not making any bold proclamations right now. He's just kind of speaking the truth. They're not contenders. As we speak right now, they're depending on winning percentage or wins, how you want to play it, somewhere between 19th and 21st in the league. We've done in record, we've done episodes already about the draft picks and the possibility of maybe even having 2 first-round picks this year, because their own pick is top 14 protected. Otherwise, it goes to OKC, all kinds of other issues that go into that. And then, of course, they may get Golden State's pick. They don't have any control over that one, but that one's top 10 protected this year in Golden State, although winning with Jimmy so far is still kind of on the fringe in terms of getting, out of the play-in in the Western Conference. But, Alex, what I want to do today, rather than get into the draft pick possibilities and should they tank, which we know they're not going to do, I want to get into it, like, what can actually be accomplished on the court the rest of the season for a team that we're acknowledging, even their all-Star is acknowledging, is not a contender. So I think you and I go back and forth on this. Let's come up with 5 things that we think maybe can be accomplished here over the rest of the season. I'm not going to tell you yours, mine before we start. You're not going to tell me yours. This is not a tough question, even though I just dropped it right here on the podcast, because I'm going to go first. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to kind of think of the first one. The most obvious one, so I'm taking this one right off the board, is Kele Ware. When rookies get a chance to play in the first half of the season, typically the takeoff time, even though there will still be mistakes, is after the All-Star break. Now, this is a chance to evaluate kind of where they've been, the role that they're in, how they're going to fit. Ware has impressed people behind the scenes. with his ability to absorb information. That's been a real positive so far this year. So you figure that carries over the second half of the season. But I also temper it with the fact that he's not an unknown quantity anymore, that other teams are going to scout him. We saw that happen to Jaquez a little bit at the end of last year. And teams now kind of have a handle on, or at least they're going to on their scouting reports, on the Bam Ware front court. We've done episodes about it specifically. Offensive rating 104, 105, not very good. That would be worst in the league. But defensive rating 99, which would be by far the best in the league. So clearly it's a group that a duo that works defensively. We expected that. It's not working yet offensively. Brady got into some of the reasons and why they need to kind of figure out the fits around them. But for Ware specifically, do you expect this last third of the season to be better than the third that we just got through? Because that's pretty much when he started to play.
Oof. That actually is kind of a tough question, but I think my gut reaction is no. I think because of what you said there, that, he's now in the scouting report. And not only that, it's not that, I think less of him for it, but I just think like his role is limited, right? Like the Heat are obviously looking to him for, the lobs, for the laydown passes, the occasional like touch shot in the paint when he's got a mismatch on him or when he gets a putback. Like that's really pretty much all of his shot profile now. If you've noticed, like the last handful of games, like the threes have really gone out the door for him, which is something we've seen for a while, for years with bigs under Spo. It's just, I think he feels like if you're not at a certain level, it's not worth taking him. I think that's more or less where he's at, because Bam and Ware are not necessarily taking that many anymore. They're taking a couple, but outside of that, it's like all of that is going to be scouted for. I think they're going to. I think there's going to be like a sort of an emphasis on not giving up those basically like shots that are 100% of the time going to go in. Like those are great looks. You know what I mean? Like Ware is not going to be missing lob dunks, and I think once that part of it is out of the game, there when they're scouting and not giving up that opening out of the pick and roll anymore, like I think it's going to be more on Tyler and the other guys who are initiating, to be able to score over the defender. But I think the help is not going to come, and I think after that it's going to be on him to adjust. And I'm not sure where it comes from, because as I said, the threes are not there anymore, and the stuff that we saw early in summer league where he was taking like mid-post, mid-range shots, turnarounds, that got, phased out of his game very, very quickly. So I think his kind of area right there is right under the rim. And when that part of his game gets taken out, I think he's going to have, and you've already seen it, there's going to be certain games where it's single-digit scoring. And maybe there's like a 4-point game and you don't feel them enough if it's a great team on defense. Like I think those nights are going to happen. I think it's because his role is so limited. I think you play him and you give him the reps regardless. I think the big thing for him, what I'm looking forward to is, are they going to be able to occasionally close with him? Even if Spo doesn't think that's the best option sometimes. It's like, if it's going well in a certain game, in a certain matchup, will he close with it? Right? And I think he's been willing to do that in the past, but it's like, you've seen very much that in a lot of close games this season, Ware is not really there. Even if he is the kind of a staple as a starter. So I want to see like if he gets those reps throughout the rest of the season in some of those closing lineups, because he's obviously like a staple in everything they do now.
And I think he needs to get those reps. I'll start with that. I think the context of this, and we're not really diving into the draft pick situation here as much, but the context of this is like, what is the downside to giving him reps? I mean, so they fall out of the play-in? Like, if that's the worst case scenario, my view on this was very different at the beginning of the season than it is now. I didn't think this team was a contender. I said that, but I did think they were a team that could get out of the play-in, provided that they got contract year Jimmy instead of contract complaining year Jimmy. And so when I thought that they were going to get that, I was like, okay, you can't really lean into Ware that much now, because this team is trying to compete for something right now, and he's going to make mistakes. It's just natural. Now, he's made fewer mistakes than I expected. I was wrong about that. He's more advanced, okay, in terms of his basketball IQ than maybe was advertised. And that's a positive. But even so, to me, Jimmy not being here clears the deck for him to play. Like, because we were never going to get to see, we never got to see him with Jimmy very much anyway. I don't know how the Jimmy Bam front court, where front court would have worked long term from a spacing standpoint. Regardless, they had to lean into Duncan and Tyler in the backcourt specifically just to create spacing because they weren't going to get that from that front court. Wiggins is a little bit of a better shooter than Jimmy from distance, although we haven't seen it so far. So it might work a little bit better now with him playing the 3, so to speak. But now, to me, again, there's no risk to this. Like, worst case scenario is they fall out of the play-in or they end up in a spot. Remember, draft order is determined by end of regular season record. They could be the 10 seed in the play-in. They could get out of the play-in, somehow get all the way up to the 8th spot because they beat the 9 seed and then they beat the winner of the 7-8 seed, get the 8 seed, but they're still going to get the draft position of the 10 seed. So there's no risk to them winning at that stage. So my thing is, if they end up the 10 seed, they end up the 10 seed if that's where
Does
it
Spo
goes.
feel that
And
way though?
no,
I
of course
think
not. Of course not. But organizationally, and I'm not saying they're going to lean into it. I'm not saying that. And I understand what you're getting at, which is that if he doesn't feel that way, is he going to give them the minutes? Is he going to give someone like Ware the minutes in a game that he's making mistakes? But here's the other
he
part of
just
it.
wasn't so jumpy for blocks. I think he's a little too thirsty for blocks. I think that
He is.
if he just irons that part of his game down and just stays on his feet
Mhm.
and uses his insane length, like
Right.
I think that he
But
he
it's
might be
not, it
thrown in
doesn't
there.
come from a bad, I agree, but it does, I think it can be coached somewhat because it doesn't come from a bad
Definitely.
place. And not to disparage
It's
someone
a
who was here
habit thing, just like the
previously,
boxing out stuff. It's all just habits that can be ironed out for sure.
but it was with Whiteside, it was not habits. It was he was stat hunting. Okay. And so I don't think that's what Ware is doing. I think this is inexperience at this level, not sort of knowing how to use his length against certain
He was able to do
offensive
that
players.
before. Now, like you got to pay. You end up giving, a wide open putback, or perhaps somebody rotates and then you give up a wide
Right.
open three. Like guys are gonna hit shots in the league. I think he's paying the price a little bit, and that probably is what ends up, being the.
But Spo has not pulled him for a lot of that stuff. It seems like I'm going to get to number 2 through 5 here in a second, and because this may be one of yours, but I feel like other players are on a shorter leash with Spo about mistakes than Ware is. It does seem like there's more of an overall directive to try to let him, in particular, play through it. With
They have
that
to now.
said, do you have a number 2?
Well, just to close that point, they have to now because Thomas Bryant is not on the team anymore, and he was apparently like his competition, but whatever. But as far as number 2, like I guess my number 2 would come down to Pelle Larsson. What do they
Mhm.
do with him? Because he's kind of like the X factor at the back end of the rotation. And like we talked about in other episodes, they have a lot of playable guys now after this trade where you traded essentially one guy who was maybe your best player for 3 rotation players. And, shout out Josh, cool guy, all that. He wasn't a rotation player for the Heat anymore. So because of that, like it's cool. And there's also kind of a problem with it because it's like you got these vets who are pretty solid in what they do, in like Mitchell and Kyle Anderson. And maybe Spo ends up feeling like a guy like Anderson is more deserving than Pella if he doesn't get his shot together. Like if the catch and shoot stuff, he made a couple, before the break there. But if it ends up continuing to be a problem, I don't think, I could see a world in that and in which that happens because I think Spo is still trying to win games here. And I could see people getting upset with that. I wonder what happens with Pelle Larsson's minutes, and I think to a lesser extent Kashad, because we haven't seen much of him all season. We've seen Spo be more than willing to reach into the 2 ways for guys who play their roles, and Kashad, that's what he does. And even with his faults, like his faults are kind of similar to Pelle right now, where it's like the shot is questionable. Pelle gives you the defense there. Kashad gives you defense. He also gives you an insane amount of athleticism and defensive playmaking. Like I think it's worth trying, and same line of thinking that you were talking about before, where like, whatever, what's the worst that can happen? But the problem is now there's so many guys that are deserving that it's like, I don't know how much Spo can lean into that on nights where, unless there's nights where multiple guys are missing.
No, I'm with you on that, and I think Kashad Johnson is someone we're going to see more from this last part of the season.
They seem to really like
They are
him, but how do you play him
they
with
are
all these guys?
They are very high on him behind the scenes, for sure. Larson, to me, I feel like they've gotten a little bit of a flavor of kind of what he can add, and I do think he'll play a little bit more towards the end of the season, but I think it's more of a training camp thing next year where they see if there's more of an expanded role they can come up with. I think they need to see what Kashad looks like on the court this year. I'd like to see him get some time. It seems like Haywood is in and out of Spo's sightline right now. Like some games he plays a lot, some games he doesn't play a lot. That does provide a bit of an opening, I think, for Kashad to get in there at some point. And I feel like, again, with this particular group, maybe you're leaning a little younger, more athleticism overall, that's a place that he might be able to help. So I want to see it more. I like what I've seen of Larson from a competitive standpoint, a defensive standpoint. The shot has got to get better, I think, if he's going to play consistently. We've talked about that. He's not a bad ball handler that needs a little tightening up in the offseason, too. But look, there. I think with Larson, a lot. Some of this actually comes down to Burks now because they have been playing Burks a little bit more, and it feels like it's to make some of these lineups work, particularly with Ware and Bam. And I have been in favor of playing Burks, but circumstances change. I've been in favor of playing Burks because I felt like they needed his shooting on the floor, and he gives you a certain professionalism. But now, again, if you're looking at the young guys, Alec Burks is not a part of your long-term future. I'd rather absorb a little bit of punishment here in letting some of the younger guys kind of grow into that. So I've changed my stance on that a little bit. I want to go to number 3 here, and let's go to the veteran players for this one. I want to see a leader emerge on this team, and I don't mean that to disrespect Bam, who is the captain, but it's a role that he's never really wanted. Now Jimmy's out of the way. You don't have kind of this counterculture type leadership there. It's more aligned kind of with the way what we know about the Heat. But as I said at the beginning of this episode, it feels like Tyler's sort of feeling his sea legs here a little bit regarding this stuff. You see some of the younger players that are rallying around him. I don't think it's a bad thing to have a couple of young leaders on the team. I don't think it's a bad thing to have someone else take that burden. I still am not going to call this the Bam Tyler build because I do not think, and I'm just going to keep saying this, and it's no disrespect, I don't think they're the 1 and 2 on a contending team. I feel like there can be the 2 and 3, with one being your best defensive player and the other probably being your second best offensive player. And by that, I mean Bam and then Tyler. But right now, with what they have, Wiggins is not going to lead. It's never been his nature. He's introverted. He's new. I want to see Tyler take even more of that responsibility over the rest of the season. I actually don't think that would be a bad thing for Bam.
No.
You see the way that Bam's reacted to Tyler and his kind of coming up this season in a very positive way, which was not the way that it was being reflected necessarily by the other star on the team. Now there's a clear path now for the two of them to lead. It does not mean that I think that that's going to make them champions or anything like that. But I just think it's better to have some of that transferring to them because, again, K-Love's not going to be here forever, at least not on the court. They don't have UD anymore. And I think Bam needs help in that role. And so that I want to see a little bit more. I want to see more of the leadership reins being passed to Tyler where it's more of a co-leadership thing. He's an all-star. He's earned it.
Yeah, I think that's already kind of been happening little by little. But I also don't want to take away from, I think Bam has shown some growth there in that aspect. I think everything, like we've talked about it for years. You've pointed it out so many times that he's had to be the face, and all the times that Jimmy hasn't spoken, Bam is there. And to a lesser extent, but also there, Tyler. Like Bam and Tyler are always the guys that we can count on speaking after games for years now, unless one has like a particularly bad game, like those guys are typically like available. Bam is always available, right? And I think he's shown growth not only like in the way that you hear him talk about the role, where like I think last year at the end of the season when they did that, that press conference, he very much was like scoffing at the idea of, I think he had grown weary of it. But now like he was kind of pushed into that role in such a different way this season, and I think he's come out of it a little bit more mature. Like I'm usually not one to talk about these things. I don't really know how to talk about like measuring somebody's leadership, but I think just from like hearing his perspective on it, like it's one thing to be like labeled the captain and all that, right? But now in this situation he's been put in, it really is the Bam and Tyler build. And I agree with you on what you said. That, like, ideally maybe another guy is up there as the number one and all that stuff. Like, I think all that is valid, of course. But it's 1,000% the Bam and Tyler build. Like, Jimmy is gone now. They've got a bunch of guys in his age range or younger. Kevin Love is the vet guy who is not in the rotation anymore, right? Like, that went outside the door even before Jimmy, right? Even while Jimmy was still playing, and them two and their units were so great in the past, they went away from it. Like, all the vet stuff is out the door, and we'll see what they do in the future and in the offseason and all that. But they're a young team right now, and I think Bam is doing a pretty good job, just from when I hear him speak, of saying the right things, and he seems like he is open to doing that job now. I think he like, if you ask him about it at the end of the season, like, I don't think he's going to give you the same answer he gave you last season. I think it would come off in a bad way, actually, because I think, like, he is that guy now. Like, you can't balk at the idea anymore. Like, this is your team, bro. Like, they've been calling you, the next culture bearer for years, and he's embraced that. So, it is what it is. It's Bam's team, and to a lesser extent, Tyler is right there with him.
All right, let's get to our sponsor, Cousins Moving, and then we'll get to two more, one from Alex, one from me. And now it's time for Who's on the Move, sponsored by our friends over at Cousins USA Moving and Storage, family owned and operated since 1996. They can service both residential and commercial moves, whether you're going across town, across the state, across country, and even across the globe. They have a 15,000 square foot private warehouse in Lauderhill, Broward County. The number one priority for Cousins Moving is transparency and being honest with their customers. They have a very low turnover, with most of their movers working for them for over 10 years. So find them online at Cousins Moving on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or visit the website at www.cousinsusa.com/5RSN. They've got an exclusive offer through 5RSN. You get 5 free wardrobe boxes with your next move, so there's no need to pack your clothes away in suitcases. Just mention 5 reasons. And now, who's on the move? You're on the move to number 4 here. What you got?
So this is a little bit of a broad one, not as much about one specific player. And I know we've touched on this in the past, so I don't want to do too much, but I think it's really an important part of figuring out who they are going forward. Finding the proper rotation. And that may not seem so important to people because, like we've been talking about, they're not a contender anymore. And, it's very mature of Tyler to say that, by the way, considering, like you mentioned, he's now, like, he's the best offensive player on this team. So, like, another guy might have easily just gone along with it and said, like, I always believe in us. The Heat are always going for a championship. And who knows how the organization feels about that comment in particular. But I just think, they're here now, and they've got to figure out the right way to go about it. They're still trying to win games, but, like, are you married to this starting lineup, right? I know I brought that up in other shows, but, like, what is the proper rotation? How can you figure out, like, how to properly optimize Ware, for example, so that you don't have to throw him in zone, or you don't have to throw, like, the lineups that he's in zone? Because I think, like, those bench units have really been a Pandora's box of just, chaos more often than not, and not in a good way. It's not like the Rockets type of chaos where they're wreaking havoc on you defensively. I think it's chaos in all the wrong ways for the Heat with these bench units. I think they got to figure out some sort of stability there, and it kind of, goes back to what we were talking about with Pella. Is like, what's the proper rotation here? Who do they go to? Like, they've got guys at different positions. I don't know what the answer is. And Brady and I have brought this up on different shows. Is like, what if you go back to Tyler and Duncan as a starting lineup? What if you put, a couple more defensive players like Mitchell and Haywood in the bench unit? What if, you keep Jovic and Ware there, and all of a sudden they've got a nice defensive kind of a perimeter defense around them. You don't have to play zone as much. You can have nice defensive units, not only in the starting lineup, but with the bench unit too. Because, like, you haven't seen that yet with Wiggins and Mitchell. They've mostly been stapled to the Bam minutes, right? Like, I think there's a little bit more mixing up that they can do. And like we've been talking about throughout the show, the stakes are not so high that you can't mess with any of this. Like, they're really going to end up somewhere in this play-in range. Like you said, worst case scenario, they slide out of the play-in. But, not much changes just from you kind of mixing things up. And on the contrary, I think mixing things up, could open up some other, avenues and lineups that they may not have on the menu right now, to use a Spoism.
No, I'm with you, and I do think they need to find some certainty. I think role certainty again is the biggest thing for this team. Actually, putting a few wins together. I don't see a huge winning streak for this team. I don't think this is a team that's like it never got this bad, but from like 11-30 to 30-11, I don't see like a 17-8 run here coming up. I hope I'm wrong because it'll make our podcast more interesting.
Terry would have to be Dion in that case.
I don't see that coming. And I was gonna mention him at some point because I have a different one for number 5, but I do think as part of this,
yeah, I didn't want to put Terry in here.
Well, I think they got to get away from the fact of trying to recoup value there. I don't.
He's part of the rotation stuff.
I know, but I'm saying like that can't be the priority. Like it just can't be. I mean he's entering the last year of his contract. The trade hasn't worked out. I do think there are things he can provide in certain situations, but not consistently. We've talked about it. It's diminishing returns. And I want to see the young players play at this point. I mean, that's really where it's at. I mean, if you bring him to training camp next year, you hope kind of he can find a role. Maybe
functional size, right? Like we've been talking about functional size for so many years. He is not only small, but he's not giving you what you were expecting from him. So now it's like this is a way that you can actually apply the word functional size to what you're doing in the rotation. It's like, okay, now like Tyler is going to be the smallest guy we play in the rotation. I think that they have an opportunity to do that.
No, I agree with you. It's just hard when you gave up a first round pick. So I understand why they've been trying to do this kind of stuff and play him. But I think at this point we're past it. And that gets to this next point, because I think a lot of these things are connected. In number 5 here is I think we can talk about Jaquez. This has not obviously been a great breakout second season, but I'm more focused on Jovic. I talked about this in the last pod. I think Eric Spoelstra needs to figure out what he wants from Niko Jovic. I do. He's just been all over the place. Well, more on his plate, but it's been all over the place this year. And he's another one. I said, it seems like he lets Ware play through mistakes more so than Jovic at this stage. And, this is a chance. Look, Jimmy's not here anymore. He was kind of Jovic's big brother. I think we all like Nico. We see the talent in Nico, but I just want to put him in a role where he can be consistent.
Yes.
Then if he's not, then it's on him. But I want to see a consistent role for Jovic, because Ware to me is a keeper for them. I just think you can't give away that kind of size. Jaquez to me is a player that you could include in a trade if you had to, if you recoup some of his value. Jovic is the one I still not sure about. At times I felt you don't move him because there's too much talent there, but it also does seem like it's hard to find the right fit with him. And now as they're going into a new build, I want to see if they can find it as they're transitioning to that. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's one of the ones that I want to see. So we got into a lot of personnel here. I'll have more podcasts over the next couple of days. I know that people want us to do a more franchise directional podcast. But we're going to bring on Greg for that one as well, because I think he wants to jump in on that. Again, thanks to our guys not thanks to our guys. Congratulations to our guys who got further than I did in the Heat Culture Cup. That thing is totally rigged at this stage. I'm not saying about me. I deserve.
It needs to be thrown into the FBI investigation somewhere, somehow.
What happened to Brady on that thing is just insanity. Just not right. I mean, just say who are going to be the 2 finalists before it starts. Anyway, we love our guy, Miami Heat UK. Anyway, thanks to our sponsors, Cousins Moving, and as well as Prize Picks. Use code 5. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.